Welcome to the WealthStack podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Rosic, the director of WealthStack Content and Solutions. I'm joined by Trevor Greenway, CEO and co-founder of Interval. And today's topic, how Interval is helping advisors attract, retain, and better serve high-value business owner clients. Trevor, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
So before we dive into our first segment, I do want to start with your background. And I always joke that this is the hardest question that you'll get this entire conversation. But tell me about what makes Trevor, well, ultimately Trevor.
I think in everything that I've done, what makes Trevor, which probably isn't for everybody, is that I'm a pretty passionate individual. And I think that, that's pretty evident in everything that I've done. I've a bit of a serial entrepreneur. I've founded a couple of businesses, Interval being kind of our most exciting and largest to date. But really, it's about the passion, right? I'm driven, I'm curious, a little bit obsessive sometimes. And as you'll learn today, I am very high energy. I'll try and keep it kind of more medium, not too high. But I do enjoy really kind of building teams, solving complex problems, and having fun doing it. And if you can't have fun in what you're doing, you're probably not doing the right thing.
Usually you don't hear fun and complex problems in the same sentence, so good for you. But would love to just dig in a little bit more on your background, kind of where you got started in this profession and what led you to ultimately become a serial entrepreneur.
So I actually began my career in commercial insurance, actually in sales. I came out of business in university, and then ultimately kind of found my way into an M&A firm. I was working in mergers and acquisitions, and it was actually in that firm that I ended up co-founding a boutique firm in M&A. It was during that process where we actually came across the idea of Interval. Interval was actually a software company by pure accident. It was a lived experience over 11 years having founded an M&A firm where we kept coming across a similar problem, but how we could ultimately empower business owners to be more aware of their underlying value and how to create more of it and the impact that could have on the ecosystem at large. So, people say, did you know you were going to end up the CEO of a tech company? I said, no, absolutely not. We believe that technology is the medium, but at the end of the day, it's there to solve a business problem. And it was the lived experience of the business problem that really kind of picked away at us. We said, no, there's something here, and then ultimately started developing a solution that has, become quite large. So it's been a fun journey. And the best entrepreneurs are the ones that are insatiably curious. And if you see a problem over and over again, start asking yourself, well, why hasn't someone solved it yet?
And look, that path is not for everyone. So what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from being an entrepreneur more than once?
It's funny. I actually think that one of the biggest mistakes, maybe it's personal to me. I assume other entrepreneurs have had this as well. There's this insatiable curiosity that a lot of entrepreneurs have, and it's actually a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Being curious is great. But if you're so curious to the point where you're a voracious learner and you take the learnings of people that have come before you, right? You look at other tech companies or other organizations in your industry that have, been through the journey and have done things. There's a lot of literature available, like Age of Information. We can read a lot, right? And sometimes I think people read too much to the point where they say, well, this, if I just do exactly what this person did or what this company did, I'm going to be successful. And I got to be honest, I was guilty of that too. And you view it as, well, these successful people did this, as opposed to looking backwards and saying, well, what was present at that time? What were the macro factors? What were the markets doing? What were their customers doing? How were they buying, right? There's a lot of very specific things that went into that success story. So to take it just blindly and say, well, if I apply this, it'll work here. If entrepreneurship was that easy where you could just read a few books and do exactly what those books said, the failure rates wouldn't be so high. So I think sometimes you got to look back and say, well, maybe I might know something. Maybe, it's okay to learn from other people's triumphs and failures, but to blindly apply it to my situation can be very, very dangerous. And I think good entrepreneurs have to trust their instincts and strike that balance.
So you answered it a little bit here, but I was going to ask you too, what advice you have for folks looking to ultimately go that route and start their own business. I guess what's the number one piece that you would offer up?
I'd say probably revel in the challenge. Some people ask me, I can't tell you, I think it was my mother-in-law a couple of years ago that said, is Trevor ever going to get a real job? Because, building and growing and scaling a startup didn't seem like a real job, at least not back then. Now it does. Now it's considered a real job because it's scaled to the point where it is one. So I think you kind of got to revel in the challenge, and what makes it hard is actually what makes it worth it. So be prepared to be told it won't work and view that as the challenge. And so that might make you a bit of a masochist, I'm not sure, but just kind of never get too high with the high and too lows with the lows, and almost revel in the challenge. And I think that's good entrepreneurs tend to be wired that way.
Well, I can imagine the family and holiday dinners then had some interesting discussions on your side of the table.
They're more they're more they're more comfortable now.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Well, I appreciate the background and the context and the advice, but I want to dive into our first segment, which I call Stats All, folks. So I want to dive right in with a number that you actually cited, because you've said that SMBs, smaller medium businesses, don't know their worth. You said that 85% of them, of SMB's future wealth, is their business, and 98% of them do not know its true enterprise value, or more importantly, what they can do about it. So set the stage here, give these numbers some context. How does Interval help with management firms capitalize on this? Because this is really the heart of the conversation today.
It is. And I think to start, and I think to really kind of answer that, we kind of at Interval, we have some very kind of specific rules we live by. And one of them is that if your solution requires someone to lose in order for somebody else to win, then it's not a solution at all. So I really wouldn't view it as capitalizing on this market need. I view it more so about how do we create kind of a mutually beneficial outcome so that everyone involved can succeed. Because yes, those numbers are staggering, right? For businesses to run their business, it's hard. It's hard to run a business, right? And you're worried about payroll. You're less worried about, well, am I creating ongoing value? You're just trying to grow, right? You're trying to grow and you're trying to survive. And so I think creating a feedback loop for them is exceptionally powerful. And that's ultimately where Interval comes in. We created a platform that centers on knowledge, right? Knowledge through automation. We think that knowledge creates enormous power. And if we can empower business owners with the knowledge of not only the value of their biggest asset, but what's actually driving that value, I think we can use it as a really kind of critical starting point. And when they know it, they grow it, right? We actually have stats to back that up. We can prove that business owners that monitor their value on an ongoing basis grow 29% year over year in terms of enterprise value because they're given feedback. Right? It's just like everything else we do in life. The more information we have, we say, well, if I don't like that outcome, I'm going to do something different. Now, what was going into it? What was driving it? How could I tweak this? That's ultimately what we are. And then for the wealth management firms, we do the same. Give them visibility to this information because when they know it, they can actually help their business owner grow everything, right? Whether that be the totality of their financial plan, meet their goals. There's a missing piece is when the advisor isn't aware of this number that makes up the vast majority of their future state liquidity, then it's hard for them to do their job well as well. And so if we can create that visibility, it helps them plan for that. It helps them ultimately facilitate more meaningful conversations and ultimately help mitigate risk, whether that be through insurance or whatever else, right? Ultimately support them in that journey by aligning goals with their business owner.
Well, I hope you have on a t-shirt, when they know it, they grow it, because that is an incredible tagline, first off. But in the context of our world of wealth management, you hear a lot that advisors need to be the quarterback. So in this particular situation where you're doing really business evaluations, why does it make sense for wealth managers to become a business owner's most trusted advisor? I can imagine this is a very specific world for some advisors when you're going after these types of clients.
Yeah, I think sometimes the most obvious answer is kind of the right one. And in the scenario with, when the question is, why should they be the quarterback? It's because they have aligned interests, right? If you think about, common ground and aligning interests, you've got so many advisors that orbit a business owner. They've got their lawyer, they've got their accountant, and they all have a vested interest in their future success and legitimately want to see them succeed. But the only one with the most aligned interest is actually the wealth manager. They both want wealth creation. The advisor wants it and the business owner wants it, period. So they're the only ones that have perfectly aligned interests. Their job is centered on creating the best financial outcome possible for their clients, their wants and their needs. So their goals are aligned nicely. And that's why I truly believe that they are best positioned to be the quarterback because of that commitment to wealth creation that they both unabashedly benefit from.
And I came across an interesting stat too, and I was just doing some research for our conversation. And While large corporations often grab headlines, it's actually small businesses that form the bedrock of the American economy. And even recent data from the US Small Business Administration reveals that it was some remarkable figure of like 33.3 million businesses in the US qualify as a small business, which is like 99% of all US businesses. And so the entrance into the US market is a newer endeavor for Interval. So anything that has surprised you or anything you learned from the Canadian markets that maybe translated over?
I think most of it translated over. And as a result, like I wouldn't say there's anything particularly surprising. And I think sometimes Canada and the US, we kind of live in our own echo chamber, or we read all your news, you don't necessarily read ours. But at the end of the day, like they're very, very similar in the approach. But I would actually argue that it's far more global than that. Because the data on small businesses that you just referenced is virtually identical, albeit on a much smaller scale in Canada. But then you look at the global numbers; they're actually very similar as well. In the developed world, for the most part, that data that you just articulated, it holds, right? So they actually are the lifeblood of many developed economies. And we're at kind of this critical juncture with the great wealth transfer upon us as the baby boomers look to exit. And there's an expectation for up to $15 trillion in North America alone might be changing hands via businesses over the next 10 years. And that's going to create an enormous amount of liquidity if done correctly. So our belief is, and we actually have the data to support this, there are likely millions of high net worth individuals out there that no one knows about because they're not liquid yet, but they're about to be. And that's a global problem, or I suppose a global opportunity, not just a Canadian or American one.
No, that makes absolute sense. And so I want to dig into this idea when it comes to business valuations. You know, what data is most important? Because conveying the value of something is one aspect, but explaining the reasons behind its value and providing strategies for improvement is even more significant.
You hit the nail on the head, and I'll probably say this a couple times throughout this conversation is we're actually not a valuation platform, right? We're a business health and analysis platform. Valuation is just the beacon of business health, right? Are you actually creating ongoing value is important, no question. But in isolation, it's pretty useless, right? You need it with context, right? It's not an event, right? It is the manifestation of all the decisions you made up until that point. And it's never right again. I've made the joke a number of times. It's like a broken clock, except it's just never right the second time, right? So it's important to get it, but it's more important to understand what went into it, right? Can you get feedback on what led to that number, whether or not it's indicative of future state value, and what can you do about it? That's what's most important when you think about valuation. Valuation is a calculation. Yes, there's some qualitative aspects that go into it, no question, and it's complex. And we don't believe it ever should be an event. We frankly don't believe it should be a report. It is feedback and analysis that has been done on a business that we believe business owners and their advisors deserve to have at all times so they can make better, more informed decisions that build value.
So, where does Interval then fit into an advisor's overall tech stack? And walk us through the process and what that looks like.
I think we're seeing a big shift in the tech stack, specifically in wealth management firms and across the board. Like we have some of our national partners, even some of the smaller firms, and they're at varying degrees of complexity. Some are, fearful of technology. Others have embraced it wholeheartedly. And I think that's gonna continue to change and evolve over time. But I think what we're seeing is this move away from kind of a product-centric service model. And we're getting more down to kind of this highly personalized, relationships and data and what that can actually be harnessed to do. So they want to see client experiences that match the requirements and demands of their client base, which is changing so quickly. And their financial journey is getting more complex. And to have this kind of connected, they're looking for kind of this purpose-built technology, is what I would call it. It's a critical component of kind of augmenting the human kind of component of advice. And I know we'll talk about AI later. It's kind of boxing in what can only the human do well, and how do we highly personalize this for these business owners. That's ultimately where we fit, is that connection point between there's a lot of data being produced. It needs to be synthesized and summarized so that those human, highly personalized relationships can occur and be empowered by technology to ultimately happen more often and in less time.
So, what has the reception been then from wealth managers and advisors? From what I understand, Interval's foundation is really in accounting firms and banks, and now this foray obviously into wealth management. So, what has the reception been?
I will go out on a limb and I will tell you that I believe that wealth management will actually be our biggest vertical. Our biggest vertical to date has been accounting. But when you think about the advisory network, and I talk about this ecosystem of people that have a vested interest, they all have slightly different, needs, right? The accounting firm is saying, I don't have enough time and I don't have enough people. They have a labor shortage. And so they're saying, well, how can I do more with less? How can you help me harness this information so that I can provide advice and, meaningful kind of proactive advisory work to my customers? And then on the wealth side, it's how can you ultimately give me visibility into the value of an asset that frankly I didn't know. So I didn't know how much insurance coverage I should be placing. I didn't know who might be my future high net worth. And in order for me to find this out, I have to spend a lot of time and a lot of, kind of very, very curious conversations to learn and build goal. And that's hard. And when time is finite and your customer list has grown, it gets challenging to be able to do that for everybody. And so our kind of in terms of the reception, it's been exceptional. We've now added a couple national firms as customers of ours, a number of wealth management firms. We've added, I think we've grown almost 300% in wealth management in the last 2 quarters. So it's like you can see it, right? Because you can see why they're very, very well positioned to be that quarterback with the vested interest, especially at this critical juncture as this wealth transfer is upon us.
So I do have to ask too, since we are talking tech, I have to ask you about AI a little bit. So what is your and interval stance really on where you think we're headed? I mean, personally, I think we're just scratching the surface of all things AI when it comes to our industry. There's seems to be this cautious optimism, but I know firms like you are truly embracing it.
That's a big question. First and
Let's
foremost,
unpack it.
let's unpack it. I'll answer it this way. It is here to stay. Like it's not a fad, right? This is just the beginning. Is it a bubble? Probably a little bit. And that's not because I don't say that because I don't believe it's not powerful and I don't believe it's not going to change the world. It is going to change the world. I think the problem right now, and where you talked about kind of that cautious optimism, the cautiousness is probably necessitated by the fact that right now it's horribly misunderstood and it's creating some confusion. So I think the cautiousness is related to that, right? Not related to the technology itself. With respect to us, it is huge. Like it's a game changer. I'm not going to lie to you. It changes how we work. It changes the way we ingest data. It gives us an opportunity to help predict new things, right? And there's so much more that's happening and it's incredibly exciting. How we've approached it is kind of dual capacity. One is kind of this future state, like what might be possible in the future. We've spun up an innovation team that is really looking to design what might the future look like, not things we can do today. What might be possible? How do we build our models? How do we keep a human in the loop so those models don't have hallucinations? Right? Really kind of be thoughtful and intentional around what our future strategy looks like. And then there's the efficiency side. And that's where I know a lot of firms have done a really good job saying, how do I now leverage AI to make me more efficient? Some of the menial tasks. How do I make the human more human? And how do I automate what can be automated? And so we've kind of carved it up into those two pieces as well. And we're excited about like where it might go, but we tend to focus more on business problems, right? Is how can we take a business problem that either we have or our customers have, and is there an application for AI within that to solve a business problem as a medium, as opposed to thinking like, well, hey, ChatGPT exists so we can solve everything, right? And so I think you kind of got to view it really kind of be mindful of the problem you're trying to solve first and whether AI can play an active role in that. And yes, be thoughtful about the future and what are the types of models that you want to be building and what do you want to own yourself, right? And not just always building on some of these, non-proprietary models and understanding at a time where data and security is so critical, using AI responsibly to drive efficiency in a methodical way kind of has to be the way that you approach it. And that's how we approach it here at Interval.
Well, get out of my brain a little bit because I was saying a year ago on a panel that it comes down to what business challenges are you trying to solve. When AI made the explosion on the wealth management scene over the last few years, it was this initial panic of, wow, what should we be using? What should we be doing? Start implementing it. For it was take a step back as technology and business, strategies have become really ultimately intertwined now. It's like you said, take that step back and look at the business cases where you can implement AI to make your life easier or more efficient. Don't just plug something in for the sake of having it. Make sure it's actually useful to your business. So I'm so glad you said that because I was saying that a year ago.
You got there first.
All right, well, fair enough. So, in the same vein of AI, is there anything that that you are excited about, like even outside of the context of intervals? Are there use cases or applications that you're seeing that have you most excited? Because what I'm seeing a lot right now are the use cases, obviously around Chat GPT for marketing purposes, these note taking AI apps where they can record all your meetings and then push it out to your CRM to create tasks in it. And like I said, we are just really scratching the surface, but are you hopeful about anything that's on the horizon potentially?
Yeah, so the stuff that you referenced, and I kind of put that into our efficiency bucket, where ultimately we're looking at, okay, where do we spend our time? What's the business problem, and what's the potential impact of the solution of adopting, whether it be an external tool, building something yourself, right? Those ones I think are exciting and interesting, but I think those are eventually going to be table stakes, where that'll ultimately just be the way that we work, and then we're going to look back 5 years from now and be like, hey, do you remember when we did it this way? And so that will ultimately become the commodity, because that'll just be the way things get done. What excites me is the things that we haven't even yet considered. And so we've spent a lot of time on our side around, how ultimately might we be able to interact with all various data sources that we get today? And is there manipulations? Is there AI that we can use to ultimately ingest things that like previously were you couldn't ingest them? And so there's some exciting things there that we've been working on an innovation from an innovation standpoint that my team would kill me if I said much more on. But that stuff is what gets me excited, is thinking about what might the future hold. And I'm not talking AGI, like I'm not talking like an end state. I'm saying what can we do that we might one day look back and say, wow, that was crazy. We used to do that this way, because I think our brains sometimes can't even fathom what's possible. And so that's where I think carving off, a team or some time, almost like a little bit of like an internal hackathon. That's kind of how we look at it, is, what are things we haven't even considered that sound crazy today? And it doesn't mean we're going to do them tomorrow. It means that let's just be mindful of the way that we thought things had to work. Moore's law is real, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the speed with which things are improving or happening. One day we might only be held back by our ability to compute. And so let's start thinking bigger and then work backwards.
Love it. Love the context. So, final question before our next segment. What can you talk about then in terms of innovation? What else is on the roadmap for Interval?
I'll get into some specifics, and I think in order to kind of provide some context for that, is one thing we've done really well and I'm really proud of, and it's probably because I didn't come from tech originally, right? I came from business. We've created kind of these constant feedback loops with our customers. So all of our wealth firms, from regional firms to national partners, they actually inform our roadmap, right? So this allows us to focus our roadmap more on themes and impact areas as opposed to like features. I think sometimes technologies get in trouble when they become a feature factory, when they don't really consider, well, what is the real world application? What does the workflow look like today? And am I actually solving a problem, or am I creating something pretty? Right? Technology actually has to do something. And so I think focusing there and working backwards while being informed by your customers has been hugely valuable to our continued evolution. And it's because of that we're now exploring, how we might integrate live with, financial plans. So can we be interacting live with the underlying value of a business directly into a financial plan, and then watching the trickle down effect of ultimately how that impacts other areas of their plan? So the advisor's job is not done for them, but the data is actually giving them a constant update of the overall picture while we kind of fulfill that one segment. And so like really the key theme for us, secondary, really is around what we call synthesizing, right? We synthesize information and we need to deliver it clearly, simply, and in an actionable way for advisors. So we don't believe that advisors need more things to do. People don't even need more tools. And I know that sounds crazy coming from a software tool. I think they need more time, because without more time, the tools are superfluous. So our focus is there. How do we create capacity by monitoring business owner customers for you while helping them create more value along the way? Then products, advice, and strategies, they get surfaced to you and you action them. So this kind of concept of you do what you do best. So our roadmap will always kind of be focused there on these themes that our customers actually inform, because we need to help business owners create more wealth, and the advisors need to be front and center there to do it. But if their advisors don't have more time and you're just inundating them with more pretty dashboards, you're not actually doing anything. You got to create capacity so that they have the time to action the things that you give them.
Absolutely. Hey, I've always said that's the one thing that you can't buy or make more of is time. So anything that can help with that is A plus. So like I said, it is actually now time for segment 2 of this episode, Trevor, which I call Ask Us Anything. And I've gone out to the social universe and asked them to submit questions they want answered by you. And we did certainly have a few folks slide into the DMs over this last week. So putting you in the hot seat, question number 1. We had somebody ask, I'm mainly just curious to hear a deeper and more detailed description of how the tool can help advisors, CPAs, and other professionals better assist their entrepreneurial clients. And while I know we've discussed this like throughout the conversation, I would say, kind of distill it down a little bit, touch on all those categories, and yeah, just speak to how the tool is helping folks. And maybe if you have a use case or anything like that you'd be willing to share, I think that would be super helpful for our listeners.
No, it's a wonderful question. And I think kind of in its simplest form, we take accounting data that business owners produce, often through year-end statements, but it can also be integrated directly into their cloud accounting system. And our system automatically ingests that information, analyzes it, and provides business health feedback to business owners to ensure they're constantly aware of the value they're creating, how they're creating it, and what they can do to improve it. The advisors, in turn, have constant awareness to the opportunities and risks that exist within their private business owner customer base and are able to place product, provide advice, and actively participate in the ever-evolving plan of the business owner. So, simplest form, that's what we do. And so the best use case that you see a lot of our wealth firms is they say, we've got all of these business owner customers and we have some data on their other investments. And we talk about some of their plans and their goals in their future, but we need more to talk to them about. We need to bring more value to that equation. And why not go to them with something and say, we want to help you understand your value of your business because that allows us to do our job better and you deserve to know it. And let's talk about how that changes the way that we look at your future. And yes, we might need to do some risk mitigation. There might need to be some insurance products. There might be excess working capital sitting on a balance sheet that could be invested tomorrow, right? So that's part of what we do is we help them identify the risks and the opportunities that are inherent in their customer base so that they can bring their products, services, and advice in the moment in a way that mutually benefits both them and the business owner.
Well, I would say that answers that question. So thank you. We did have one more. How does Interval compare to competitors here in the US, like a Biz Equity?
I get asked this question a lot, but without kind of getting into the nitty gritty of product differences and various automations, that's probably a conversation for another day. I'd probably answer it this way, and this is typically the way that I answer this question when I get it. It's really about how we view valuation. And I think I've kind of said this and touched on this previously, is we don't believe valuation is an event or a report. It's a number that people are curious about, certainly, and it's powerful, but it's only powerful if you do something with it. And that something should be obvious and indicated clearly to both business owner and advisor. We actually named ourselves quite purposefully. It's not by accident. You're interacting with your valuation. That's what interval is, right? It's the ultimate business health metric, but it's like a car. The second you drive it off the lot, it's not correct anymore, right? So it's how do you keep and grow business value? That's where the power is. And the interactions that result between business owners and their advisors, those are really the critical parts. So we're value creation and risk mitigation made easy by creating visibility to ever-changing business health metrics. And yes, valuation is one of them. But we do this by automatically ingesting data. So no one, either the business owner or advisor, has to take more time that they currently don't have, right? So harness it, put it to work for the two parties that care the most about it. And so I'd say that's probably a differentiator but with us and Biz Equity. I think great product. We love that valuation is front and center, and we think it should be. I agree. I just don't think it's a moment in time. I think it's a concept that needs to be constantly interacted with because everyone else that is in that ecosystem or that orbit of the business owner benefits from that.
So I lied and I promised that there were only 2 questions, but I actually have one because there was some fun banter on LinkedIn about I believe it was one of your AI tools, and there was a naming competition about it. I believe it was Ryan Newman from Adjusted Risk Podcast had mentioned it. And so I just want to follow up on that. Was there a contest? Has anything been named? Give some context because the people would like to know.
It was funny. I mentioned it to Ryan, and I knew, like, obviously I was being recorded on a podcast, but it was at the end where it was very conversational. We were talking about AI, and I said, our team internally, if we're building out some AI models internally that we're beginning to kind of work with and track and see ultimately what might be able to come out of those. And it's been an exciting kind of endeavor. And our team just internally started making the joke saying, well, we need to come up with a name for it. And so they said, should we call it Intervalerie or Interval Kilmer? And I mentioned that to Ryan, and he was telling me about, because he's in Lake Tahoe, and he was telling me about how the most recent Top Gun was filmed in Lake Tahoe, and so his vote was for Interval Kilmer. And since that came out, and he referenced it on LinkedIn, Interval Kilmer is getting all the votes. So internally, our different AI models are currently lovingly referred to as the Interval Kilmer models. So.
Oh, that is fantastic. Well, I appreciate you being put on the spot and your insightful answers and indulging me in that answer. But we have come to our final and what might be my favorite segment that I affectionately call Stack It or Whack It. So I'm going to throw out a few technologies and be warned, they are not always necessarily WealthTech related, sometimes just random thoughts, especially if I know you. And you tell me if they are essentially worth the hype or not. So stack it or whack it. So don't judge me, but I did a little online snooping and saw that you like to golf or when you have time, because you are certainly busy. So I have to ask about golf swing analyzers. Do they help or hinder your game, stack or whack?
Whack, 1000%. Golf's hard enough. Thinking makes it worse.
Fair enough. And coming back to the industry, number two, stack or whack when it comes to the current state of predictive analytics.
Cautiously stack. Predictive means different things to different people. And the models I think that people are using that are kind of underlying these predictive analytics models, they vary so widely. And so I think there's a lot to be learned about the future from the past. And the opportunities in this space are truly, truly endless. But just make sure ultimately that the models supporting them are robust in nature, because sometimes I think that they can be a little bit misleading if you're not careful.
All right. I think you're the first guest to say cautiously stack. I like that.
Trailblazer.
That's right. Trailblazer. Well, Trevor, it has been just an absolute pleasure getting to know you. And thank you for all your insights today. Please feel free to tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and what you're working on at Interval.
Absolutely. You can go to our website, www.inter-val.ai. You can see us on all social media as well, LinkedIn, Instagram, and what have you. And there's a newsletter that you can sign up for, and just kind of keep an eye on new feature releases, what we're up to in market, and our press releases as well. So we'd love for you to follow along.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. And be sure to like and subscribe to the WealthStack podcast on all major podcasting platforms and follow all things WealthStack on wealthmanagement.com, LinkedIn, and Twitter, or X. I still can't call it Twitter. And if you want the in-person WealthStack experience, join me June 10th through the 12th at the Boca Raton Resort in Florida for Wealth Management Edge. Thank you all for tuning in.